Hello and welcome to Two Talks with Dr. Davis. I'm Libby Ruth, the Chief Communications Officer for Richland School District 2. We hope that the 2018-2019 school year has gotten off to a premier start for all of our parents, students, employees, and community members. This time of year, Dr. Davis is always asked, what's new in Richland 2? If you have asked him that question recently, he may have told you that Richland 2 will have a bond referendum on the ballot on November 6th. Now, for some of you, this may be the first time you've heard about Richland 2 having a bond referendum. That's because it's been 10 years since the district has held an election that asked voters to vote either yes or no on a question about borrowing money. Now, according to state law, money borrowed through a bond referendum can only be used to pay for capital needs. That's things like building a new school, or renovating existing ones, or purchasing or improving any other long-term assets, maybe for transportation or technology. So the bond referendum is a big deal, and we want voters to have all the information they need before they go to the polls on November 6th. Now, since the district is the one asking to borrow the money, we can't tell you how to vote. But we do believe that we have a responsibility to share the facts about the bond referendum with you. That's why Dr. Davis, our superintendent, our chief financial officer, Dr. Harry Miley, and our executive director of operations, Mr. Will Anderson, have been traveling all around the district telling people about the facts of the bond referendum. Earlier in September, they had a presentation for our Superintendent's Faculty Advisory Council and Superintendent's Parent Advisory Council. We taped that presentation and we're going to show it to you now. The first clip is Dr. Davis answering the question, why is there a bond referendum on the November 6th ballot? As part of that answer, our Chief Financial Officer, Dr. Miley, will talk about district funding. Then he will go on to explain the impact on taxpayers and what voters will see on the ballot. Let's watch.
So the question everyone has asked, or many have asked, is why do we have a question for a bond referendum on the November the 6th ballot? And it's a pretty simple answer. We have some immediate facility needs that we must address over the next 5 years. We have facility needs, immediate needs in the areas of safety and security. We have needs in the areas of academic, learning spaces, transportation, technology, arts, and athletics. When we look at safety and security, we're talking about addressing things like entrances and exits. We're talking about addressing things like access to our campuses, our technology needs when it comes to safety and security, cameras, intercom systems. When we're talking about academic learning spaces, we'll spend some time sharing with you this afternoon or this evening information regarding collaborative spaces, meeting the demands of 21st century learning across the district. As we address the safety and security needs of every school and every building across the district, we also need to address some of those inadequate areas of collaboration spaces and learning spaces and teaching spaces within some of our older schools. We'll also need to talk about the transportation needs. You'll see evidence or support of information regarding what our transportation needs are, how our buses run, they're triple and quadruple routed, to the condition of those buses, and the need for adding new buses. We'll talk to you about the technology needs, our infrastructure, sustainability, replacement, things like that. And we'll also share some information with you about our needs as it relates to arts and athletics, because we are a growing school district and we have a large percent of our students who participate in the arts each and every day, as well as participate in athletics, and how we plan to address those needs across the district, K through 12, as it relates to our arts and in our athletics, to look at addressing those needs from 6th grade to 12th grade. I will share some information with you in regards to that, but right now, Dr. Miley is going to come before you and share some information with you regarding the funding and how things are funded here in the district.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. That last slide, one of the things it said was there's no other way, no other funds to pay for these improvements. And a lot of people, in fact, you might have just seen in the video that our budget, our last year's budget was $273 million. That's a lot of money. Our current FY 18-19 budget is $285 million. That's a lot of money. But the problem with the $285 million is that 90% of that is used for salaries and benefits for us. That leaves about $28 million. That's a lot of money also, but when you have electric bills of $10 million and other expenses of running the district, it doesn't leave much money for major facility improvements. Oops. A second source of funds, we do borrow money. We borrow money every year. State law allows local governments, such as counties and cities and school districts, to borrow funds without going to the voters. It's a state law that we refer to 8% funding, and the law says that a local government can borrow up to 8% of the assessed value of their district. So if your assessed value is $100 million, you could borrow $8 million without going to the voter. We do that every year. You may, in the winter of every year, we pass what we call the 8% projects. It's funds that we borrow for, we spend about $10 million a year. $5 million of that's for IT work, infrastructure and replacement, and $5 million for maintenance. Again, a lot of money. One of the things I like to mention is that we have about $800 million worth of facilities. Industry standards suggest that you spend between 2 and 4% of the value of your property on annual maintenance. You have a home, you know you have to have things done, you have to paint, you have to do the gutters, you have plumbing issues, so every year you should spend about 2% to 4% of the value of your property. The value of our property, 2% is $16 million. 4% is $32 million. We're spending 5%. Which is good. I think we keep our facilities in great shape, but it's pushing some of our deferred maintenance down the road for things that are beyond our capacity to do with our annual 8%. The last source of funding is the referendum. That's the source we're talking about tonight. The referendum is when we can borrow money, but to do that, we must go to the voters and say, do you agree to allow the district to borrow funds to make these improvements? So when we say the only source of funds, to make the type of improvements we're talking about tonight, the referendum is the only source of funds. To put it in a little bit more everyday language, to put it into, for instance, your household budget, our operating budget is kind of like your monthly income, annual income. You spend that on food, gasoline, transportation, clothing, and things like that, normal expenses. If something comes up that's like a new refrigerator or a new wash machine or an HVAC system, most of us don't just write a check out of our checking book. We might have to put it on a credit card. Our operating budget is kind of like your household income. Our 8% funding is kind of like your credit card. Yeah, you don't have to go to the bank to borrow that. You're authorized. You go and borrow whatever the limit is on your credit card, $1,000 or $2,000. But once you charge $2,000 on that card, that's it. You don't charge any more on that card. That's kind of like our 8%. We've got the ability to do that. It's kind of our credit card, but once we hit that limit, we can't borrow any more on that 8% like you can't if you max out your credit card. So if something really happens, either good or bad at your house, you have a growing family and you got to add a bedroom or bathroom or something, most of us, that's beyond most of our credit cards. What do we do? Are you going to buy a new house? What do? We go to the bank, ask permission to borrow money, and we get a mortgage. That's kind of like our referendum. So that's kind of the source of fundings. Again, there are all sources of funding, but there's only one available for you to make major household improvements or add a wing is probably a mortgage. So that's kind of like ours. The real question is most people want to know is, that's great. I love your plans. Those sound really needed. I know we need them. How much is it going to cost us? We got in touch with the Richland County Assessor's Office to find out what the average value of a home in Richland 2 is and the average value of an automobile. The average value, according to the Richland County Assessor's Office, the average value of a home in Richland 2 is $167,000. Obviously, there are homes worth less than that, and there are homes that are worth more than that. But the average home in the district is $167,000. The average automobile is $8,500. So the average home and average automobile together, this bond referendum, if everything passes, the additional taxes due to this bond referendum that a taxpayer would pay in these average house and average car would be $72 a year or about $6 a month, which we say is about like a cheeseburger and French fries and a milkshake is the difference per month in the funding for this bond referendum. We have two questions. The first question is, do you authorize the Board of Trustees to borrow up to $382 million for safety and security and technology and transportation improvements and learning spaces improvements? That's the first question. Second question says, and it's very carefully written, if the first question passes successfully, do you also authorize the district to borrow up to $86 million for Fine Arts Center improvements, fine arts, and athletics? If question one passes, that authorizes us to go make the safety and security improvements that Barron was just talking about. If question one passes but question two does not, we still can go make the safety and security improvements. If question one passes and question two passes, we can do it all. The important thing is if question one fails, it doesn't matter what happens with question two. We can't do anything. If question one fails, even if question two were to pass at 100%, we would not be able to borrow those funds to make for fine arts and athletics.
Well, that was a lot of information. So we're going to take a quick break, and you can look at this information about where you can come and ask your questions directly to the presenters. Welcome back to Two Talks with Dr. Davis. Before we get back to the presentation, let me tell you where you can find out more about the bond referendum. It's right at your fingertips on your mobile device or your computer. Just go to www.richland2.org/bond. On that website, you will find lots of facts, including a comprehensive list of all the needs covered by the bond referendum, as well as the needs broken down by school. If you have a question that doesn't get answered in today's show, check out the Frequently Asked Questions link on the webpage. Two of the questions in the FAQ are part of the presentation that we're going to skip over today for the sake of time. But if you want to know more about the two-year planning process that led up to the bond referendum, or more about Richland 2's bond referendum history, check out the FAQ at www.richland2.org/bond. Now let's get on with the presentation. Next, we're going to hear Mr. Will Anderson, Executive Director of Operations, tell us about the specific areas of need that are addressed by the bond referendum. Here's Mr. Anderson.
I'm going to spend a few minutes just to talk briefly about the projects that are in the bond referendum. So first is safety and security. Dr. Davis just mentioned it is a referendum on safety and security. You can see $288.1 million is for safety and security projects. That's roughly 62% of the total $468 million. So we really mean safety and security, and that doesn't include the transportation and other safety issues as well. The first thing you see, secure entrances. We will make sure that every single school in the district has a secure entrance. We are committed to making sure that happens, so every school that doesn't have one currently will have a secure entrance, and those will be first and foremost in the plan. So everything with safety and security will be up front and center in our timeline for construction. Also Dr. Davis mentioned cameras, hardware systems, doors, film on windows, fencing, bollards, things that can really make our schools safer. Replacement schools. In our studies and in our work and our data, 3 schools were identified to be replaced due to safety and security issues. Those are Bethel Hanbury Elementary School, Forest Lake Elementary School, and E.L. Wright and CFK South. Those schools, we are able to replace those schools on the current site. Those would be a phased construction, so the schools would be in session while we built these schools next door, and then we would transition those students into the new facility. A couple of schools were identified as needing to be replaced, Condor, Keels, Lonnie B. Nelson, for example, but those 3 schools, the sites are not available for those, so we're going to do some major renovations to those facilities. Maintenance issues, Dr. Miley mentioned the maintenance, the deferred maintenance. The roof, for example, in Richland Northeast High School is an example of a project that's in the referendum. That roof cost about $4 million. So of $5 million a year we get for maintenance, 4 would go to one roof. So we have about 16 roofs that are in the referendum, about 12 or 14 HVAC systems. Those are safety issues. If we have leaky roofs, we have mold, we have mildew, we have things that are concerns for our kids and our teachers and faculty in our building. So we want to make sure that we get those addressed so that we have a safe and secure environment for our children and teachers to be in. And the reduction of portables. Portables have been great for a growing district. They allow us flexibility. They allow us to do a lot of different things. But it was loud and clear through meetings from our advisory councils, from our feedback, and we knew as well that they're not very safe. And so we want to reduce those as much as possible by building a 5th addition at Blythewood High School, by CFK North putting them in a permanent facility, and adding additions at other places that have portables, such as Polo Road Elementary School and Killian Elementary School. $61.5 million will be for academic enhancements. That's about 13% of the total $468 million. This will be making sure that we align our schools to the curriculum, align them to different magnets, given those collaborative spaces that these schools need. These older schools, creating some equity so they will have some identical or at least some similar spaces that some of our newer schools have. A lot of research is done about the impact that a facility has on the learning environment, and there is data that supports that. And so we want to make sure that we can have equitable learning environments across all of our schools, and we'll see those in places like Condor Elementary School, Joseph Keels, Spring Valley High School. A lot of schools throughout the district will have some equitable enhancements, and those are especially our older facilities. Transportation, $7 million for transportation. Primarily, most of this will be for new buses. Actually, 25 new buses, but they'll be activity buses. The state of South Carolina owns the bus fleet in the state. They own and maintain them. We rely on them to give us buses. We've requested buses every year as we've grown substantially, and I think we've gotten 2 buses since then, and we really now have gotten 7 new buses, but the buses have not kept up. The beautiful buses you see on your screen are 1988 buses we just got a week ago. Anybody drive a 1988 car to and from work? Those, I laugh, we all laugh at that, but unfortunately we have kids that ride on that bus to and from school every single day. And that's unfortunate. And so we want to make sure that we can provide a safe ride to our schools, for our students to our schools, as well as try to make some of efficiency. So we want to buy these buses and make them yellow so they can serve dual purposes. We also want to make security improvements on our buses, as well as some upgrades to our facilities, bus hubs. Dr. Davis mentioned technology, $25 million for technology, really to sustain our one-to-one initiative, sustain the infrastructure, the hardware, the things we have dedicated over the 20-plus years in Richland, too, to keep up, to make sure our kids have the technological needs. All of us have some type of phone, and as soon as you bought it, the phone is obsolete, and so technology is ever changing, so we want to make sure we invest in that as well. Lastly is the athletics and the arts. We have about 82% of our students last year participated in at least one arts class. So arts is a big part of Richland School District 2. And so we want to make sure we have the spaces for arts in Richland, too. And the primary focus will be a performing arts center. We had hundreds of events last year at our district auditorium. So a performing arts center will be great for all the events that our students across the district have, as well as our community. Many of you who live in the area have to drive 30, 45 minutes to maybe the Koger Center to see an arts performance, and having an performing arts center in the district would be phenomenal for this community. We also wanted field houses at all of our athletics high schools. That consists of concessions, restrooms, locker rooms, etc. Athletics have grown throughout the years. I don't believe we had lacrosse 15 years ago, for example, and some other sports. So the spring sports and other sports having stands for field houses for those, as well as a smaller version in all of our middle schools. This will allow us to make sure that our community as well can use these facilities that currently middle schools do not have restrooms. You have to go inside the building or have portable restrooms. Football stadiums is the other big one in this section. That would be football stadiums at Richland Northeast High School and at Ridgeview High School. That would be roughly only 3% of the total budget. For both stadiums, about $20 million. I know sometimes that gets led in the headlines of football stadiums, but when we're talking dollars, it's only about 3% of the total budget. And additionally, we'd also want to do athletic turf at all of our high school fields as well.
Thank you for joining us for this first episode of Two Talks with Dr. Davis for the 2018-2019 school year. Dr. Davis will join me next time when we take a closer look at one of the schools slated to be rebuilt as part of the bond referendum. Until then, I hope you have a premier day, and we'll see you next time.